In the previous video about policy formulation, network, and value-added formulation, and outcome-based implementation, we have looked at the importance of having a small, efficient public service and a very large private sector in order to attract investment and also to create a liability for politicians in case of corruption. That is also a global trend, especially in developing countries, but the magnitude of is much more in developed countries. So if there's too large public service, and then it becomes almost impossible for politicians to reduce the size of the public service because of people who lose their jobs. It will create unemployment. It will create social problems, and that becomes then a problem of non-reform. Now tonight we will focus on diversity, equity, and inclusivity or inclusiveness. Why a country should be very cautious in focusing on too much on diversity, equity, and inclusiveness. So what do I mean by equity? In this case, I refer to equality of outcome. There is a huge focus under sustainable and good governance on creating equality, and also indirect in the Sustainable Development Goals, as if equality is always based on injustice. Now, we are not born all equal. We are born with different talents, different productivity, different skills, different rate of work, and therefore also our output and contribution to society and to institutions will differ. Some people are able to spot opportunities, identify opportunities, and take the best advantage of that. For example, Elon Musk and several other world-class entrepreneurs. So if one doesn't have the skills to identify opportunities based on experience and your perspective and your knowledge and your personal profile of risk-taking, it is not another person's injustice that you create or contribute to, because you haven't had that ability or developed it yet. The same, that is for input equality or opportunities for everybody. Now, in some social welfare countries, education is free, dental care is free, and as long as it's being funded by the private sector, and it's funded by a growing private sector that are not limited in terms of regulations and red tape, and then it probably can be justified, especially in countries where we have a very low baseline of education, in developed countries like in Africa and specifically in South America. However, if we focus on equality of output, then it means that whatever my input is or whatever my output is should be equal as yours. So it doesn't matter if I work harder or faster. My output and my remuneration and reward should be exactly the same as yours. Now that in itself is social injustice, and it's not based on merit. In the previous video about sustainable government and governance, I've indicated the reasons why merit-based economy and merit-based political system is the best system for economic growth and development, including for the poor, where everybody is uplifted. The living standards of everybody is uplifted, even if inequality increases. although people can become richer, and the gap between the rich and the poor increases, that is not a problem. Why is it not a problem? Because you can never create more social injustice by allowing people with wealth being created to allow it for redistribution in any form, because nothing is for free in life. If you take from the rich in order to give to the poor in terms of land, for example, then you should ask your question, why are these persons well off? And you cannot assume that the person to whom the land will be distributed will be used at the same rate of production with skills and talents as the one that have acquired wealth on that specific piece of land, because then your assumption is incorrect. And for that reason, to attempt to create equality of outcome is a social injustice, and it's directly opposite a merit-based system of any kind. And therefore, the country should be very careful in order to focus on addressing inequality in a country. Equal opportunities can be created, and that's very important. But if that opportunities are not being used because people doesn't have the skills or the mindset of the risk profile to take it, even that will then not create quality of opportunities that's being used and utilized that can create output. The second point is inclusiveness. Now, and that is linked to one of the requirements of the UNESCO for sustainable governance. Previously it was good governance, and now the global trend is about sustainable governance. That is consensus. We try to include everybody. Now, in order to create and include everybody, it means everybody's consent must be achieved. Now, in order to do that, it's almost impossible. That makes the process of deliberation and participation extensively long, extensively costly, and it's not possible. One has to take a decision somehow based on the majority or based on expertise. So inclusiveness, to try to create inclusiveness in a country in order to treat all people fairly, that is no problem. And that is also linked with equity, that means fairness and justice. But then it should be applied consistently. That means certain groups and people should not be treated preferentially, as we get in better and a patronage system in the United States, as we get with affirmative action treatment in most developing countries, where there are citizens that are treated better than others because of so-called injustices of the past, without taking in consideration that more unfairness are being created in the process by descaling the economic growth and development in a country to the disadvantage of everybody. Everybody eventually will then become poorer, and those will be affected the most will be the poorest of the poor. So inclusiveness can work only when it's consistently applied, and politicians cannot do that because they appoint people not based on merit. They appoint people based on political affiliation. In all countries, it happened that way. And therefore, inclusiveness cannot be a principle to go for in a sustainable government. And therefore, consensus, that is a requirement of UNESCO, that is linked to inclusiveness, is also not a sustainable governance principle. Then diversity. Now, diversity, richness and diversity is extremely important. Nigeria, for example, has more than 256 ethnic groups. Namibia has about 11 ethnic groups. And And the richness and diversity in Nigeria is unbelievable. And that is that contribute towards the richness and ideas in a country. But it all depends how those ideas are being harnessed and if people are all treated same. So diversity is a beautiful concept. It all depends on how it's been applied. And if it proliferate, like if we look at the gender proliferation of lesbian, gay, queer, and plus people, transgender also, when it's always extending and it's not based on biological terms, but it's based on the feeling of a person at a specific period in time. That's been used to a very large extent to claim victimhood and to receive preferential treatment. If diversity is applied in that terms, then it is not conducive, then it's not sustainable. So a country should be very careful with these sustainable development ideas, and some of them also mentioned by the World Economic Forum. Actually, the World Economic Forum are responsible for the Sustainable Development Goals, and not the United Nations. So one can realize with this principle of not absolute inclusiveness can work, not equality of output can work. It's not sustainable. And on diversity, one should treat very, very lightly. And it all depends on how it's been applied in order to create not preferential treatment, as in gender case, where people prefer to certain pronouns like ze and ze to be called in Canada, compulsory in terms of legislation. It's just unheard of. Jordan Peterson have spoken a lot about that. And I think that's important. So that concludes then this video about the cautious treatment with international terms that sound very woke, like diversity, equity, and inclusiveness, that in itself, what they call DEI, is not sustainable. Thank you very much.